The new VP tried to fire me on my first week. She didn't know I own the company. New VP tried to get me fired in my third week on the job. What she didn't know is that I'm the majority shareholder of the company she works for, and I'd been sitting 3 desks away from her for a month under a name that wasn't mine. I need to explain how I got here because I promise you, none of this was some power trip. I never wanted to be the secret boss. I wanted to know if my company was actually okay, or if the people I trusted to run it were lying to my face in the quarterly reports. 2 years ago, my uncle passed away and left me controlling shares in a mid-sized logistics and supply chain company. Around 400 employees, offices in 3 states. I was 31, I worked in a completely unrelated field, and suddenly I owned 62% of a business I barely understood. I hired a CEO to run day-to-day operations. I sat on the board. I signed off on big decisions twice a year, and otherwise I stayed out of it. That was the deal I made with myself. I wasn't going to be the guy who inherited money and started playing boss. But over the last year, the numbers stopped making sense. Revenue looked fine on paper. Retention didn't. We were bleeding senior staff, the kind of quiet resignations where nobody tells exit interviews the real reason. My CEO kept saying it was industry-wide turnover. I believed him for a while. Then I didn't. So I did something I'm not entirely proud of, but I'd do it again. I had our lawyer draw up a short-term contract for a temporary internal auditor role. Gave myself a different last name, my mother's maiden name, scrubbed my LinkedIn, and had HR slot me into the operations department as a contractor named Daniel Reyes. Only the CEO and our general counsel knew who I actually was. Everyone else, including my own new VP of operations, thought I was just some guy on a 90-day contract reviewing workflow inefficiencies. Her name was Vanessa Cole. She'd been hired 6 weeks before I started, brought in from a competitor with a reputation for cutting dead weight fast. My CEO was thrilled with her. I was about to find out exactly what kind of weight she liked to cut. Vanessa was good at her job in the way that con artists are good at reading a room. Charming to anyone above her, sharp-elbowed with anyone she saw as competition, and completely dismissive of anyone she thought didn't matter. I fell into that third category immediately. My first week. She introduced herself to the department by saying she was going to restructure for efficiency, which everyone quickly learned meant she'd already decided who was staying and who wasn't. And the next 90 days were just paperwork to make it look fair. I kept my head down, I asked normal questions, I pulled workflow data, sat in meetings, took notes, and what I found was ugly. Vanessa was quietly building a case against 3 senior employees who'd been with the company 8, 11, and 14 years respectively, all of them earning salaries that made them expensive. All of them replaceable with 2 junior hires each. She wasn't doing this because they were bad at their jobs. Their performance reviews were solid. She was doing it because their headcount cost looked good on a slide she wanted to present to the CEO as her efficiency win for the quarter. I watched her manufacture friction. She'd assign someone an impossible deadline, quietly change the requirements halfway through without telling them, then flag the missed deadline in a report. She'd exclude people from meetings where decisions got made, then criticize them later for being out of the loop. Classic stuff, if you've ever worked somewhere with a bad manager. But watching it from the inside, as someone whose name was actually on the building, made my stomach turn in a way I wasn't prepared for. Then it turned toward me. I think Vanessa clocked pretty fast that I wasn't just some low-level contractor drifting through. I asked too many specific questions. I noticed too many inconsistencies in her reports. In one meeting, I gently pointed out that a productivity metric she'd presented didn't account for a system outage that had cost the warehouse team 2 full days, which made her underperformance numbers for that. Team look worse than they actually were. I wasn't trying to embarrass her. I was trying to get accurate numbers because accurate numbers were literally why I was there. She smiled at me in that meeting. It was not a nice smile. 2 days later, I got called into HR for the first time. Nothing serious, a check-in, they called it. HR mentioned that Vanessa had flagged some concerns about my communication style in meetings and wanted it documented. I said fine, documented it is, and went back to my desk. That's when I understood I wasn't watching her build a case against 3 senior employees anymore. I was one of the 4. Here's where it stopped being subtle. Over the next 3 weeks, Vanessa built what I can only describe as a small, tidy trap. She started CCing me on emails with instructions that contradicted what she'd told me verbally, so there'd be a paper trail that made it look like I was ignoring directives. She accidentally left me off an all-hands meeting where a project deadline moved up, then flagged my team's late deliverable in a report to the CEO, my CEO, who at this point still had no idea Vanessa was the one who'd moved the goalposts. Then she went after the other 3, all in the same week, like she wanted it done before end of quarter. 2 of them got put on formal performance improvement plans built on cherry-picked metrics. The third, a woman named Priya, who'd run the West Coast distribution relationships for 11 years, got accused of something much worse. Vanessa filed an HR complaint claiming Priya had falsified expense reports on a client trip. I knew that was a lie the moment I heard it, because I'd seen the actual receipts during my audit work 2 weeks earlier. Priya's expenses were boring and clean. Vanessa had taken one line item, a client dinner that ran over the standard per diem because the client picked the restaurant, and reframed it in her complaint as pattern of financial misconduct. Priya was suspended pending investigation. She cried in the break room. I watched people who'd worked with her for over a decade go quiet and careful around her, the way people do when they're scared proximity to a scandal might get them caught in it too. That was the moment I stopped being an observer. I went to HR and to General Counsel, the 2 people who knew who I actually was, and I asked for the full expense documentation from that trip, plus every performance review and internal message thread connected to the 4 cases Vanessa had built. It took 2 days to pull it all together. What came back wasn't just sloppy, it was a pattern, dates that didn't line up. Metrics presented without context she absolutely knew existed, because she'd been in the meetings where that context was discussed. A message where she told another manager, in writing, "We need the numbers to support letting these 4 go before Q3 headcount review," before a single performance conversation had even happened with 3 of us. She hadn't built a case based on performance. She'd built a performance narrative to justify a decision she'd already made. I asked General Counsel one question. Is this enough to act on today, or do I wait for the official HR process to grind through its usual 6 weeks while Priya sits at home unpaid and scared? Counsel looked at the file for about 10 seconds and said, "This is enough." I told them to set the meeting. The meeting got scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, framed to Vanessa as a quarterly review sync with the CEO, HR, and General Counsel. I asked to be included, still as Daniel Reyes, the contractor. Vanessa didn't think twice about that. Why would a contractor auditor matter in a room like that? She probably assumed I was there to present some workflow deck. She walked in confident. She had a slide deck ready, the same one I'd seen pieces of for weeks. Headcount reductions dressed up as operational efficiency. She got about 4 slides in, cheerfully explaining why letting go of 4 senior expensive employees would streamline the department, before the CEO stopped her and asked her to explain the Priya expense complaint in detail. She gave her version, confident, rehearsed, a little performatively concerned, like she was doing the company a favor by catching this. Then Counsel put the actual documentation on the screen. The real receipts. The internal message where she'd told another manager the headcount decision came before the performance case. The timeline showing she'd excluded 2 of the 4 employees from meetings and then cited their absence as a performance issue. I watched her face change in real time. That specific kind of change, where someone realizes the floor isn't where they thought it was. She looked at me, still just Daniel Reyes to her, sitting quietly at the end of the table. And I think some part of her understood before anyone said it out loud that I wasn't there by accident. The CEO asked her directly, "Did you file a false HR complaint to manufacture grounds for a termination you'd already decided on before any performance review took place?" She tried to spin it. Said the language in her message was just how she talks internally, that Priya's expense issue was a legitimate concern regardless of timing, that she'd been brought in specifically to make calls, and hard calls sometimes look messy from the outside. That's when I spoke. I introduced myself, my actual name. Told her I'd spent the last month reviewing exactly the kind of decisions she was defending. And that I wasn't a contractor. I was the majority shareholder of the company whose employees she'd just spent 6 weeks trying to push out with a fabricated misconduct complaint. I have genuinely never seen someone's expression collapse that fast. She didn't say anything for a solid 10 seconds. Then she tried one more time to reframe it, said something about how she didn't have full context on company culture yet. Counsel didn't let that stand. The documentation didn't care about context. It showed intent, in her own words, in writing, before a single legitimate performance conversation had happened. She was terminated that afternoon for cause, which under her contract meant no severance and a clean legal path to void the non-disparagement clause she'd been counting on to protect her reputation on the way out. HR immediately reversed Priya's suspension, cleared her file publicly within the department so nobody would quietly assume she'd actually done something wrong, and reinstated her with back pay for the suspended days. The 2 employees on the fabricated performance improvement plans had those plans voided, and their original reviews, the honest ones, restored to their permanent record. Priya came back to work the following Monday. I still hadn't told most of the department who I actually was. That came out gradually over the next couple weeks as I finished the audit and formally stepped into an oversight role instead of pretending to be a contractor. Priya found out along with everyone else. She cornered me by the coffee machine, and instead of being weird about the fact I'd been sitting near her desk under a fake name for a month, she just said, "I knew that expense complaint was insane. I'm glad someone with actual power in this building agreed." That stuck with me, not because it was a big dramatic moment, but because it was the whole point. She hadn't needed me to save her because I was some hero. She needed someone with actual authority to look at real evidence instead of a rehearsed narrative. That's it. That's the whole lesson buried in this story. Most workplace injustice doesn't survive contact with real documentation. It only survives because nobody with power bothers to check. We restructured the VP role. Brought in someone internally who'd been passed over for it the first time around. Someone who'd actually worked with the team for years and didn't need a head contradiction slide deck to prove she understood the business. As for Vanessa, she tried to fight the for-cause termination through an employment attorney about 2 months later, claiming wrongful termination and reputational damage. Her own written message about needing the numbers to support the firings before any real performance process happened was, as our counsel put it, not really a message you want a jury to read out loud. The claim quietly disappeared before it ever got near a courtroom. Quick update for anyone who's been asking in the comments of the last story I posted. Figured I'd close the loop on this one properly, since a lot of you wanted to know what happened after. Priya's back running West Coast distribution, and this quarter her numbers are the best they've been in 3 years. Mostly because she's not spending half her energy managing a boss who is actively trying to build a case against her. The 2 other senior employees who'd been put on fake performance plans are both still with the company. One of them actually got promoted last month. I stepped back from the disguise entirely. I'm now on site once a month under my real name, in an actual oversight capacity, which is a strange adjustment after a year of anonymity, but it's been good. People ask real questions when they know who's listening, instead of performing for a slide deck. The one update that surprised me, about 6 weeks after everything happened. I got a message through LinkedIn from someone who used to work under Vanessa at her previous company, the one she came from with that cuts dead weight fast reputation. They said almost the exact same pattern had played out there 2 years earlier, different names, same fabricated complaint, same conveniently timed headcount slide deck. That employee had been let go for real. No documentation review ever happened, because there was no anonymous contractor named Daniel Reyes quietly pulling receipts in the next department over. I don't know what to do with that information yet, honestly, but I passed it along to our legal team just in case it ever becomes relevant to anyone doing reference checks on her in the future. Anyway, that's the whole story. If you've ever had a manager build a case against you out of thin air, I believe you, and I hope whoever's above them eventually checks the receipts. Sometimes they actually do.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more fascinating Reddit tales, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to Archives of Reddit. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.